circle it and go read it in full. I'm Cassie Sugimoto, and I'm going to be talking about collaboration and authorship. It'll be a brief overview, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about its application in library and information science. To start with the definition, I'm going to use Patel's definition of collaboration, which is a process of functional interdependence between scholars in their attempt to coordinate skills, tools, and rewards. And traditionally, this has been operationalized in the idea of an invisible college. This was historically derived from a group of mid-17th century British scholars who used to meet informally outside of the normal academic structure of the colleges. And they called themselves an invisible college until they formally organized themselves into the Royal Society of London. In today's society, we typically use the invisible college to describe this network of individuals that doesn't have an institutional or geographic affiliation. They are drawn together by common research interests. They meet for conferences, they circulate scholarly material, they collaborate in research, and they also act as a power structure in that area, sometimes governing who's getting published in that area, who's getting money in that area, and generally directing the way in which research in that area is going to go. So they may sort of stifle ideas that are not part of this general power network of the invisible college. What I'm going to be focusing on today is this collaboration in research, which is operationalized as the unit of analysis for this is the journal article or the conference article in which more than one author appears in the byline. But know that there are other ways in which people collaborate, but that's what I'm going to be looking at specifically today. So there's increasing collaboration. That's pretty much a fact. In 1963, Price predicted that by 1980, the single author paper would be extinct, and scholarly publications will move steadily toward an infinity of authors per paper. That's a bit dramatic, but not altogether an untrue trend. In 1992, Anderson did a study of the world's 20th most prolific researchers by the amount of output, and they averaged at least one paper every 11.3 days. And the most prolific of these, who was a Russian crystallographer, published every 3.9 days. So we'll get to these issues later, but you wonder what his contribution is to each of these publishable works if he's able to publish every 3.9 days.
Not studying graduates.
So these ideas come in. Cronin talks about hyperauthorship in 2000 as just being this overwhelming amount of authors on each paper, and what does it really say about who is an author and what an author is. Just a quick numbers touch is the Science Citation Index shows that there's 1.83 authors on every paper in 1955, and the average number of authors per paper in 2000 is 4.16, and that's across all the sciences, even those who don't have sort of the biomedical tendency for huge hyperauthorship. So that's a pretty big increase in the last 50 years. So why would people want to collaborate? Well, although they're not causal relationships, all of these things have positive correlations with collaboration. So different quality metrics that have been applied, productivity in terms of research output, acceptance for publication, impact is measured through citations, and the amount of funding. So anytime, the more authors you have on a paper, the more likely you are to be cited, the more likely you are to get published, the more likely you are to have funding for that given research thing. And of course, these are all interconnected and interrelated, but these studies have shown that this is pretty much the trend. So that makes us wonder, what does authorship become? In 1964, Price said that authorship should be considered a privilege rather than a right, and a recognition of a distinctive contribution rather than just being a member of a team that happened to produce something. This came to a head in the early 90s when New England Journal of Medicine received a publication with 200 authors on it, and that included departmental secretaries. And these people had not contributed to the paper, but they had contributed to the workflow within the team. So the biomedical journals, I think about 200, got together and said, what is authorship? And they said, well, it has to be a substantial contribution in one of these three areas. Conception of the thing, the drafting of the article, or the reviewing of the final draft. But of course, this is still up to the authors to decide who substantially contributed to one of these areas, and their definition of substantial is what's used. But this brings up issues of ownership and ethics. Typically, we say that when someone publishes something, they gain the right to that knowledge. They somehow own the knowledge that they've created. And when someone else wants to use that knowledge, they cite the person, and that's the payment for that knowledge that's exchanged. Other people, when they're using a little piece of someone else's knowledge, but not as substantial, might acknowledge them in their acknowledgement section. So that's the issues of sub-authorship. Who is an author? Who's a sub-author? And how do we show who's contributed the most? Do we have a decreasing amount of contribution by name order, or is it just alphabetical? And that's falling out of practice, but for a long time it was alphabetical, just to say everyone's equally contributed to this. But these multiple authorships complicates both the rights and the responsibility, because anyone who's found some amazing discovery wants to claim that they own that knowledge. But when there are 200 people on the paper, who really owns that contribution? And also what's increasingly a problem is falsified information. If something's falsified, no one on the paper is going to claim that they knew about it, or that they contributed that piece, or that they own it. And Garfield sort of anticipated this in 1982 and called for all journal editors to require in writing that you say, I accept responsibility for this paper. So even if you're one of 200 and there's falsified information in that, you are to be held responsible for it. And now we have, using that New England Journal of Medicine thing, there are policies that have been adopted by nearly every journal saying that you need to accept some responsibility for what's written if you're considered an author. So in addition to these sort of issues of falsified information, there's contributions, because publications are built so heavily into our reward structure. How do we count who wrote this article? So a lot of people are really adamant about one article is one article. So there's 4 people on it, you each get a fourth of a credit on it. It's not going to count for more than one article. No one can count it as one, because then it counts as 4 articles. Other people say, no, everyone can count it. It counts for every person that's on it, they get it counted as one article. And other people just say only the first author gets to count it as their author. And there's also adjusted counts saying let's weight it and give the first author more counts than subsequent authors. But interestingly, when you take a group of scholars and you ask them, how much did each person contribute? Their number adds up to more than 1, or it adds up to more than 100%. They'll say, oh, this person did 50%, this person did 75%, this person did 40%. You start to wonder about their counting metrics. But it might say that mathematically we're not good at assessing credit and contribution because it depends on the team, it depends on the project, and maybe in some cases a multi-authored paper is more valuable. Maybe they contributed more, maybe it's a more in-depth project. So there's variations across the different disciplines, which most of you probably know that there's been a continuum from the humanities, which is less collaborative, to the hard sciences and engineering, which has been more collaborative. The interesting player in this is the social sciences. As you can see, Powell's study found that most musicologists non-collaborative. A 2005 study of Canadian research also said 10% in the humanities had another author on a paper, at least 2 or more. 2/3 of them in the social sciences, and nearly every publication coming out of natural sciences and engineering had more than one author on it. But this used to be, the social sciences used to be really close to the humanities and the continuing, even counted with them. It was social sciences and humanities and hard sciences and engineering. What we've seen in the last 2 decades is this quick, dramatic switch where social science is moving quickly towards the sort of model of the hard sciences. And some people are saying, well, this is reinforcing the idea that the social science is a big science now. It's moving towards this big science model. And if you remember back to those positive correlates with multiple authorship, those are also things that are highly characteristics of big science models. People who are highly productive, people who have a lot of funding, institutions that are accepted, their publication rates are higher than other things. So what about library and information science? There have been many studies, but I'm only going to go over 3, and these 3 are in information systems, information retrieval, and then JSIST. And in almost all of them, about 50% of the research coming out was collaborative, 62% for information systems, 48% for information retrieval, and we're getting about 2 to 3 authors per paper, and that seems to be pretty standard with a maximum of about 6 to 7 across library and information science. So we're kind of maxing out there, and that may be because of the size of our discipline and the amount of funding we have on each project, that funding more than 7 people on a project is just unreasonable for us. But as you can see, this is a huge point, is this decreasing trend of single authorship. Just between 1987 and 1997, it went from 71.9% to 36.9%. So that shows a huge change in the model of publications that we had in library and information science. So in conclusion, collaboration is increasing across every discipline, even philosophy and the humanities, where we thought that there was no collaboration going on. It is happening, and they're always showing that those who collaborate are more productive in terms of their research output. However, it does vary across the disciplines. Some disciplines will still average around 2 authors per paper, while some things in the medicines might average around 50 authors per paper. Also, I hope that we've shown a little bit about how it complicates these issues of contribution, credit, ownership, and ethics, and how we need to start thinking about who is an author and how do we assess contribution. And some new models are saying, write it down on the paper, right? Who contributed what, Cassidy Sugimoto, she contributed methodology. Jed contributed the analysis, and who did what, so that we know when we're looking at a paper who's responsible for the information in it. There's been a little bit on inter and intradisciplinarity, but not very much. The research so far has pretty much said how many authors on each paper, but not who are those authors and where are they coming from. And we're no longer just collaborating within our invisible college, but between invisible colleges, because these invisible colleges are so subspecialized that to get sort of a broader audience, we start pulling skills and different tools from other invisible colleges. So that's an area of future work, as well as looking at different theories and models, such as social network analysis, which has been brought up to evaluate these groups of collaborative research and how we're disseminating and moving among the groups and how hard it is to get into a group and start collaborating with them. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Simon.
Thanks. This is a subject that interests me a lot. I was actually talking about this, or talking about some of the issues yesterday. One of the questions I had was when you mentioned productivity changes, especially in the humanities and social sciences, where previously there wasn't quite this phenomenon. How is this change reflected? If, for example, you had 20 social scientists, and previously they'd each have written one paper, now would there be twice as many papers, each with
Right, now I see where your question is going. And I think Price and Beaver in the 60s actually made a really good comment about that, is we collaborate because there are people in our fields who have less than a full paper in them. And we say that there's a lot of people walking around who are a quarter paper people. There are people who have a quarter of a paper in them, and they can really contribute a great 25% of a paper, but they couldn't by themselves write an individual paper, or it would take them a lot longer. So what we're saying is same amount of authors, more papers. And then also the interesting thing on that point is this distribution curve. If you look at a normal distribution curve of how we should be accepting those who are writing full papers and those who are writing half of a paper and a third of a paper, a quarter of a paper, we basically tolerate down to the 1/8 of a paper, but we don't really tolerate people within our society and within our academic society who have less than 1/8 of a paper in them. They don't kind of show up in these collaborative networks. So you have to have at least 1/8 of a paper in you to really be engaged in the publication output.
Second question, if you exclude economics from the field of the social sciences, does that make a difference, or is that information not available?
That's a good question, and you could look at it individually, but I don't have that information. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, while Holly gets set up, let me change the tape.